reconciliation. And I know through the work that you've been doing, I mean, you have ambassadors for reconciliation that have come out of the Ashley Kriel Youth Leadership Project. So maybe just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I also just want to echo what our panelist has said. I think it's in the small ways that we can make a difference. So sometimes when we think about reconciliation work, or we think about social justice work, we kind of think of it in these really grand terms. And sometimes what happens is you kind of have to step back and think, but what can I do as an ordinary South African, as one young person? I mean, how am I going to further the conversation around reconciliation, etc.? But it's in the small ways that we do it. And as part of what we try and do with the Ashley Kriel Youth Leadership Development Project is to create spaces in which these conversations can happen. So just on a very practical level, what young people can do and what young people have been doing is to initiate these very difficult conversations. That's one thing that we as young people are very fortunate, a very fortunate position that we find ourselves in, that we've got freedom of speech. We can initiate these conversations. We can have difficult conversations. And fortunately for us, we've got our parent generation who's also there. And I'd like to emphasize that in order for us to move towards a more reconciled South Africa and to a South Africa that is more socially cohesive, it's going to be important that we emphasize intergenerational conversations and intergenerational dialogue so that young people and the parent generations, that we can together come up with solutions going forward. I think also another practical way that young people can get involved to kind of promote reconciliation is to tell the stories of their communities and to tell their stories. And that's something that's been happening right through, and I think that's just one of the practical ways.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eleanor. Zianda, I mean, we have Shadrach here. He's talking about, you know, the plight of young people in higher institutions of learning, your universities. You know, the fact that a lot of young people are at university, but they're going to bed hungry. And I want to maybe just hear your thoughts as somebody that had gone to Stellenbosch, you know, and also, you know, there has been this, you know, the open Stellenbosch movement. To what extent do you think that universities in South Africa are committed to transformation and reconciling the past and healing those divisions to promote reconciliation?
I mean, I think speaking from my experience from Stellenbosch, because I only went to Stellenbosch, I think one of the biggest things when I was there was that the university really failed to, it's very difficult to say own, but to really grasp its own part in apartheid and in South Africa and how it, I mean, having former prime ministers of the old South Africa all having studied at Stellenbosch and having come from there, I think it's very difficult that at some institutions they've sort of grappled with their apartheid past and history a lot better than other institutions have. And personally, I think Stellenbosch didn't do a great job at that. I'm hoping that with Prof. Pumla there'll be a change and there'll be, you know, a move towards sort of bettering that. But I think in many ways, and what Shadrach was speaking about, is that we forget that when you go to a higher education institution, you're not going there as this one person who was then plucked out of somewhere and then put there, and then everyone's equal. We all come with our own inequalities, we all come with our social backgrounds, that sort of thing. So it's very difficult, I think, when everyone presumes that we're equal once we get to university, and particularly then for those students who are struggling to say, I am struggling. And that's how some end up then, you know, going to bed hungry. So again, like I say, some institutions are better than others at realizing this inequality. And some will have social workers who say, you know, with peer educators or academic mentors, please keep an eye on X, Y, and Z. You know, different people who they probably know are not doing as well as everyone else. But at other universities, it's kind of assumed. And it's kind of, oh, I'm sure they'll be fine. I'm sure that someone at home is taking care of them, sending them money. And that's simply not the case. So I think it's what Shadrach points out as a microcosm of the issue of not everyone is equal once they reach a certain place. And that's why it takes longer for others to graduate. That's why it takes longer for others to acclimatize to a university environment, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, wow. Thank you for those thoughts. I think just linking up to the whole issue around black anger, Professor Pumla, I would like to hear your reflections on the whole notion of collective guilt, and you know, where do we place young white South Africans in that whole debate. You know, there's a sense that, you know, they have to also bear that collective guilt for the past. What are your thoughts on that?
Yo, I have to disrupt this procedure of being cut off because it's a long story. Something needs to be disrupted here, but let me try a shorter version of it, of the response. One of the things that is clear in these contexts of post-conflict, which is not post actually, kind of continuities of violence and trauma from the past, is that there is something that is passed on from the parents' generation on all sides. We talk about the trauma being transmitted to the victim group. There is also this sense of shame and guilt being passed on to the white generation, and that is real, but it's often denied. People don't want to acknowledge that actually I do feel the burden of guilt and shame for being white, for what, and the reason for that is that facing that shame is painful. And it's painful especially because it is true, it is real that white people have benefited from the past. And the young white generation are entering university spaces with an advantage of having inherited privilege. And this notion of privilege is real and true. And so now things are coming to a head because no longer are universities spaces for an elite community, both black and white elite community of people who can afford fees. It's a mixture of all classes. This is why students are starting to speak about intersectionality in all its forms, because now we are entering this historical phase where so many issues that were not relevant during my time are coming to a head, and including the issue of race and how it is experienced today. In my days, race was there. We experience it when you go to town. We experience it because you are living in the absence of privilege, opportunities being closed to you. Now, young black students, I mean in all their diversity, Indian, colored black students, African students, they are confronting the issue of difference and lack of privilege head on because they're living side by side. White students who drive in cars, they go back to their apartments and they have to take maybe 3 taxis and a train to go home, and they have to wake up at 4 a.m. to get to their classes. So just the difference in their privileges, rather in their opportunities, there's a vastness, you know, in the difference. And so these issues are real. White students also face this because they can see, they know that they actually do experience privilege, but it's difficult for them to find language to actually embrace this experience of privilege. And then, of course, the way that the discourse is unfolding, it's a discourse of confrontation, a discourse of blame. There is no space for anyone to think. It's a discourse of social media where statements are expressed without thinking sometimes. And so there is no space for real reflection on what does it mean to be white? What does it mean to be a 23-year-old white person?
Thank you very much. Let me just cut you there. I want to pick the discussion up with you, Dr. June, just on the whole issue of privilege, right? And really coming for white South Africans having to confront and admit that kind of privilege that they've inherited. But also Ziyanda was talking about, you know, the fact that race is embedded in all these social institutions. Yet at the same time, we find that, you know, there's also sort of people that are advocating that we do away with this race-based categories in terms of how we define access to services, even university admissions and so forth. And you find that people, you know, have a sense that, you know, if we continue using these race categories to define and rearrange society, that becomes in itself a hindrance to reconciliation. And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the first question on white responsibility, I think that's so important. And I think there's probably some trauma in trying to, one has to acknowledge, first of all, that you've benefited. And once you've acknowledged, you can actually say, now what am I going to do about it? So I think in South Africa, there's a struggle to acknowledge we need to really appeal to the spiritual side of white South Africans to say, please acknowledge first of all. When you acknowledge, then we can build on, and then we can work out how we're going to share and so on, because that is reality. That's the first point. And young people won't know what to do if their parents are not acknowledging it at the dinner table. So a second point about race, I think experiential knowledge is so powerful. When you experience racism as a result of eugenics and all kinds of things, deep-rooted stuff, you can't take that away, that you're actually experiencing what it is to have this designated label that has been given to us by apartheid. So I think that it's very important to move away from those Nazi terms, which they are, but to actually not in the process deny the black pain and experience, nor the white, and also not to deny white privilege. I think that is dangerous when we use moving away from labels.
Thank you very much. Let me cut you. We have to go on an ad break. Stay tuned. We'll be back after the ad break.
Namas palisa ngithi indodakazi yethu inesaluni yayo lo muntu lo une LPA
Opa, Mr. Program Director. Thina bakamkhize.
would like to give a final
Parting gift. Vela,
yini yazi ukuthi indodakazi yethu upalisa ukhule nge-DS man ukhule abukela i-Disney Junior ukhule abukela umzansi wethu umzansi bioscope yini nisinika umdubulo
Siyabona le is for mahala.
wakayibona into equality emahala ucela nihambe mahala umdubulo lobo postponiwe yeah.
Why settle for umdubulo when you can get quality entertainment? Keep it 99 with DSTV Access for only 99 Rand per month. DSTV Access, now ngayithola.
It's more than the vast skies, the horizons that do not end. It's more than the antiquity within, the tempest without. It's the rhythm that guides our heartbeat, the pride that ignites our game, the spirit that drives us forward and fuels our ideas, our passions, our dreams. It's the home that connects us all. It's our Africa.
Welcome back. We're talking tonight about youth and reconciliation in South Africa. We're reflecting back on the legacy of the TRC and what it means for youth in South Africa today. Remember, again, you can join the conversation on Twitter, hashtag TRCat20. Also, Facebook page, like that page, Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. Let us now just check with our social media desk, Samantha and Jizeda. Are there any questions that have come?
Thank you, Ayanda. Yes, there have been burning questions that came through from our participants on social media. The first question that I have is, why aren't dialogues on reconciliation within societies taken to, why aren't dialogues on reconciliations initiated within societies as a step to addressing some of these injustices? That was the first question that came through. There's also another question: how do we as young people ensure that such activities do not disrupt or put to test our reconciliation as a people? I also had another question that was asking, is reconciliation possible when youth are still fighting for basic rights such as access to education? There was also another question that came through from @Cairo_Ratnasari saying, are the issues on youth, are the issues on reconciliation and youth unique to South Africa, as well as there was also a question that was directed to Prof. saying, what can South Africans practically do to overcome issues of woundedness?
Yeah, I also have 2 Facebook posts. So the first one is from Kay Mokwena, and he's saying, victims who have appeared at the TRC hearings, have their families really benefited from that compensation? And have the economic conditions really changed with that money? The second one is from Lara, and she's saying, at which point do corporates recognize responsibilities in how they uphold structural inequality? Youth are still victims of unemployment and remain marginalized.
Thank you very much to you, Sam, and to Jazida. We appreciate. Back to our panel. Quite a lot that's come from our social media desk. Perhaps to start with you, Eleanor. I mean, there's a question there, asking, is reconciliation possible if youth are still struggling with with issues of basic education and so on?
Thanks, Ayanda. So, as we mentioned, myself and some of the other panelists has mentioned, one of the biggest impediments to reconciliation in our country is the persisting socioeconomic inequalities within South African communities and South Africa at large. And until we kind of address those, it's going to be a long and difficult road to reconciliation. But I do think that it is still possible. And the way in which it is possible is if we really take to heart how inextricably linked these issues are, that you can't have reconciliation without socioeconomic justice. And socioeconomic justice can't stand on its own without having components of reconciliation in it. So I do think that it's possible. It will take a lot of work. And it will have to be multi-pronged. It will have to come from all sectors. So from education right through to corporate, and I think we'll touch on that conversation.